Welcome back to Chill Sports History, where we take a calm and relaxing look at some of the most memorable stories from the world of sports. Whether you are listening closely, keeping this episode on in the background, or settling in at the end of the day, I hope you can get comfortable and enjoy the story. Today, we are going back to the 1995-96 NHL season, when a young expansion franchise from South Florida unexpectedly became one of the biggest stories in hockey. The Florida Panthers did not have a roster filled with famous superstars, and almost nobody expected them to compete for the Stanley Cup. What they had instead was an outstanding goaltender, a disciplined system, a collection of overlooked players, and one of the strangest traditions the NHL had ever seen. A single rat in an old arena would give the season its identity, but the Panthers still had to earn everything that followed. Over one remarkable spring, they defeated 3 established opponents and reached the Stanley Cup Final in only their 3rd year of existence. This is the story of how the Florida Panthers rode the year of the rat all the way to the Stanley Cup Final. The Florida Panthers entered the NHL in 1993 as part of the league's expansion into new American markets. South Florida was not considered a natural hockey destination. The region had warm weather, beaches, and no long-standing professional hockey culture. The Panthers also had to compete for attention with established teams from the NFL, NBA, and Major League Baseball. Their first home was Miami Arena, a relatively small building near downtown Miami. The facilities were cramped, the franchise had no history, and many people in the region were still learning about the sport. Despite those challenges, Florida was more competitive than most expansion teams. The Panthers were coached by Roger Neilson, one of hockey's most creative tactical minds, and built around a defensive style that gave them a chance against more talented opponents. Their most important early addition was goaltender John Vanbiesbrouck, who had spent most of his career with the New York Rangers. Florida also added veterans such as Brian Scrudlin, Scott Mellanby, Tom Fitzgerald, Bill Lindsay, and Gord Murphy. Many had played useful roles elsewhere without becoming major stars. In Florida, they were asked to help establish an entire organization. The Panthers surprised the NHL during their first season. They finished with 83 points, set records for an expansion team, and missed the playoffs by only 1 point. Their games were usually close, Vanbiesbrouck was reliable, and the team showed unusual discipline for such a new roster. Florida took a step backward during the shortened 1994-95 season and again finished outside the playoffs. After 2 years of being competitive without reaching the postseason, general manager Brian Murray decided the team needed a change. Before the 1995-96 season, Murray replaced Neilson with Doug MacLean. MacLean had never been an NHL head coach, but he was not being asked to rebuild everything. Florida already knew how to defend. What Murray wanted was a coach who could bring greater confidence and emotion to the team. The Panthers had spent 2 seasons learning how to stay in games. MacLean wanted them to believe they could win them. The roster had developed a useful combination of experience and youth. Vanbiesbrouck remained the foundation in goal. Mellanby provided scoring, physical play, and leadership. Scrudland had already won Stanley Cups with the Montreal Canadiens and understood the demands of a long playoff run. Fitzgerald, Lindsay, Dave Lowry, Mike Ho, and Jody Hull gave Florida dependable forwards who could defend and contribute timely goals. Ray Shepard provided another proven scorer. Stu Barnes added speed, and Rob Niedermeyer continued developing after being selected near the top of the 1993 draft. The most important young addition was defenseman Ed Jovanovski. Florida had selected him first overall in the 1994 draft, and he joined the Panthers as a 19-year-old rookie. His size, mobility, and confidence made him immediately valuable. Veterans such as Gord Murphy, Robert Svela, Paul Laus, and Terry Karkner allowed Jovanovski to develop without carrying the defense by himself, but he was still trusted in difficult situations. By the end of the playoffs, hockey fans across North America knew his name. Florida's season began with an incident that had almost nothing to do with hockey. On October 8, 1995, the Panthers were preparing for their home opener against the Calgary Flames at Miami Arena. Before the game, a rat appeared in the team's dressing room area. South Florida was dealing with a large rat population at the time, partly because of construction around the arena. Scott Mellanby eventually struck the rat with his hockey stick and ended the interruption. The players returned their attention to the game, and Mellanby used the same stick when he went onto the ice that evening. Mellanby scored twice as Florida defeated Calgary 4-3. Afterward, Vanbiesbrouck joked that Mellanby had recorded a rat trick. It was a simple play on the traditional hockey term, hat trick, and at first it was little more than an amusing dressing room story. The local media reported it, fans heard about it, and the strange tale began spreading around South Florida. During a later home game, a fan threw a plastic rat onto the ice after a Panthers goal. Then someone else did the same. One rat became a few, and a few became dozens. Before long, plastic rats were flying from the stands whenever Florida scored. The celebration quickly became impossible to separate from the team. Toy stores began selling plastic rats to Panthers fans. Vendors offered them outside the arena, and some supporters carried several into each game. When Florida scored, the building erupted and the ice became covered with plastic animals. Arena workers had to collect them before the game could continue. Opposing teams found the delays irritating, and the NHL became increasingly concerned, but Panthers fans had found something that belonged entirely to them. South Florida did not have generations of hockey customs, so it created one almost by accident. The rats attracted attention, but they would not have mattered if the Panthers had not been winning. Florida opened the season strongly and remained in the upper half of the Eastern Conference. The Panthers rarely overwhelmed opponents with offense. Instead, they protected the middle of the ice, competed for loose pucks, and trusted Vanbiesbrouck to handle the chances that remained. When they gained a lead, they were comfortable slowing the game down. When the score stayed close, they believed someone would eventually create an opportunity. Mellanby enjoyed the best offensive season of his career, scoring 32 goals and finishing with 70 points. Shepard added 31 goals. Barnes, Niedermeyer, Lowry, and Fitzgerald contributed enough offense to keep opponents from focusing on one line. Florida did not have anyone approaching the scoring totals of the leading stars in the Eastern Conference, but it could receive an important goal from almost anywhere in the lineup. Vanbiesbrouck remained the center of everything. At 5 feet 8 inches, he was smaller than many goaltenders entering the league, but he compensated with quick reactions, intensity, and an aggressive approach. He had spent years playing in New York and understood the pressure of important games. The Panthers knew that if they defended well and found 1 or 2 goals, Vanbiesbrouck might be able to carry them the rest of the way. Florida finished the regular season with 41 wins, 31 losses, and 10 ties. Its 92 points placed the Panthers 4th in the Eastern Conference and secured the first playoff appearance in franchise history. It was an impressive result for a team in only its 3rd season, but Florida was not considered a serious Stanley Cup contender. Pittsburgh had produced one of the highest scoring seasons in modern NHL history, while Philadelphia had finished first in the conference. The Panthers were viewed as difficult opponents, especially with Vanbiesbrouck in goal, but advancing far beyond the opening round seemed unlikely. Florida's first opponent was the Boston Bruins. Boston had qualified for the playoffs in 29 consecutive seasons and was led by Ray Bourque, one of the greatest defensemen in NHL history, along with skilled center Adam Oates and veteran forward Cam Neely. Boston understood playoff pressure in a way the Panthers could not. Almost every Florida player was appearing in the postseason for the first time with the franchise, while the Bruins treated playoff hockey as an annual expectation. The difference in experience did not trouble the Panthers. Florida won the opening 2 games at Miami Arena, scoring 12 goals in the process. Every Panthers goal brought another shower of plastic rats, turning the franchise's first playoff games into a spectacle unlike anything else in the NHL. Florida then traveled to Boston and won Game 3, taking a 3-0 series lead. The Bruins avoided elimination in Game 4, but the Panthers returned home with another chance to finish the series. Game 5 was much tighter. Boston faced elimination and played with the urgency of a veteran team trying to extend its season. The score was tied at 3 late in the 3rd period, and overtime appeared likely. With a little more than a minute remaining, Bill Lindsay collected the puck along the right side. Bourque moved across to defend him. Rather than sending the puck into the corner, Lindsay attacked. He moved around Bourque, protected the puck as he cut toward the goal, and lifted a shot past goaltender Bill Ranford. Florida held on for a 4-3 victory. The Rats covered the ice, and the Panthers celebrated the first series win in franchise history. Lindsay's goal immediately became one of the defining moments of Florida's early years. It did not come from one of the team's leading scorers. It came from a hard-working forward who had scored only 11 times during the regular season. That made it perfectly suited to the Panthers. They did not require a star to rescue them. Any player could become the center of the story for one night. The victory over Boston moved Florida into the second round against the Philadelphia Flyers. This was a far more intimidating challenge. Philadelphia had finished with 103 points, the best total in the Eastern Conference. The Flyers were built around Eric Lindros, a 23-year-old center who combined elite skill with extraordinary size and strength. He played between Michael Renberg and John LeClair on a line known as the Legion of Doom. LeClair had scored 51 goals, while Lindros and Renberg gave the line enough size to overwhelm almost any defense. Florida could not match Philadelphia's star power. Its best chance was to remain patient, limit chances through the middle, and prevent Lindros from controlling the series physically. Much of the attention fell to Jovanovski. He was still a rookie, but his size and skating made him one of the few Florida defensemen capable of confronting Lindros without immediately being overpowered. He did not shut the Flyers down by himself, but watching a 19-year-old compete against one of the NHL's most feared players became another important part of the run. The Panthers won the opening game in Philadelphia, immediately taking away the Flyers' home ice advantage. The teams exchanged victories through the first 4 games, leaving the series tied at 2. Almost every contest was close. Philadelphia had the more dangerous offense, but Florida was comfortable within narrow margins. The longer the series remained even, the more pressure shifted toward the favored Flyers. Game 5 went to overtime. Florida survived Philadelphia's pressure and eventually found the winning goal, taking a 3-2 lead back to Miami Arena. The Panthers now had an opportunity to eliminate the top team in the Eastern Conference in front of their own fans. Philadelphia scored first in Game 6, but Florida answered and entered the third period with the score tied. The Panthers then scored 3 times in the final period, and Vanbiesbrouck protected the lead. Florida won 4-1. Once again, the ice disappeared beneath a layer of plastic rats. The Panthers had defeated the first-place team in the Eastern Conference and advanced to the conference final. What had begun as an unusual expansion team story was becoming a genuine Stanley Cup run. Florida had eliminated Boston with its history and experience, and Philadelphia with its size and star power. The challenge waiting next was even greater. The Pittsburgh Penguins had produced the most explosive offense in the NHL, scoring 362 goals during the regular season. At the center of everything was Mario Lemieux. After missing much of the previous 2 seasons because of injuries and treatment for cancer, Lemieux returned to score 69 goals and finish with 161 points. Jaromir Jagr recorded 149 points, while Ron Francis added another 119. Pittsburgh had enough skill to turn almost any mistake into a goal. Florida's approach appeared vulnerable against the Penguins. The Panthers wanted controlled, low-scoring games. Pittsburgh could score several times in a matter of minutes. Vanbiesbrouck had been excellent through the first 2 rounds, but he was now facing a team capable of creating chances that no defensive system could completely eliminate. Florida needed every player helping in the defensive zone, and it needed to believe that Pittsburgh's talent did not make the result inevitable. Game 1 was played in Pittsburgh, and Florida delivered one of its best performances of the postseason. The Panthers won 5-1, immediately changing the mood of the series. Pittsburgh responded by winning Game 2, but Florida returned to Miami and produced 61 shots in Game 3. The Panthers won 5-2 and moved ahead in the series. For a team generally associated with defense, it was an unexpectedly aggressive performance. The Penguins recovered and won the next 2 games, taking a 3-2 series lead. Florida's season was suddenly one loss from ending. Game 6 returned to Miami Arena, where the crowd waited for another chance to send rats onto the ice. Florida built a lead, Pittsburgh pushed back, and the Panthers spent the final minutes protecting a narrow advantage. They survived for a 4-3 victory, forcing a 7th game in Pittsburgh. Game 7 presented the greatest test the franchise had ever faced. Florida was trying to reach the Stanley Cup Final in its first playoff appearance. The Panthers did not need to prove they were more talented than Pittsburgh. They needed to remain organized, allow Vanbiesbrouck to see the puck, and stay close long enough for one opportunity to matter. The game was tied at 1 entering the third period. Pittsburgh generated chances, but Vanbiesbrouck refused to allow the Penguins to move ahead. Near the middle of the period, Tom Fitzgerald carried the puck into the offensive zone. He was nearing the end of a long shift and did not appear to have a dangerous opportunity. Rather than waiting for support, Fitzgerald released a long slap shot toward the net. The puck found its way past Tom Barrasso and into the goal. The play seemed almost too simple for the importance it carried. It was not a carefully designed passing sequence or a brilliant individual move. It was a tired player sending the puck toward the net and creating something from very little. Florida led 2-1. Pittsburgh pushed forward, but Vanbiesbrouck remained steady. Johan Garpenlov eventually added an insurance goal. When the game ended, the Panthers had won 3-1. Vanbiesbrouck made 39 saves in Game 7. Florida had survived one of the most talented offensive teams of its era and had done it on the road. A franchise playing its third NHL season had become Eastern Conference champion. The players gathered around their goaltender, received the Prince of Wales trophy, and prepared for a destination almost nobody had imagined when the season began. The Florida Panthers were going to play for the Stanley Cup. Back in South Florida, the run had transformed the relationship between the team and its city. People who had barely followed hockey before the season now knew the names Vanbiesbrouck, Mellanby, Fitzgerald, Jovanovski, and Lindsay. Miami Arena had become the center of an unforgettable celebration. Television broadcasts showed thousands of rats covering the ice, and the images spread far beyond Florida. The Panthers were giving South Florida its first genuine NHL memories. The Stanley Cup Final brought a different kind of opponent. The Colorado Avalanche were also playing their first season under a new name, but they were not a true expansion team. The franchise had relocated from Quebec City, where it had already assembled one of the NHL's deepest young rosters. Colorado was led by Joe Sakic, Peter Forsberg, and Claude Lemieux, while defensemen such as Adam Foote, Sandis Ozolinsh, and Uwe Krupp provided mobility and size. Colorado had also acquired goaltender Patrick Waugh from the Montreal Canadiens during the season. Waugh had already won 2 Stanley Cups and 2 Conn Smythe trophies. He gave the Avalanche championship experience and one of the greatest goaltenders in NHL history. Colorado had eliminated Vancouver, Chicago, and the 62-win Detroit Red Wings on its way to the final. The Avalanche were talented, physical, and prepared for the moment. Florida had almost no time to recover from the conference final. After winning Game 7 in Pittsburgh, the Panthers traveled directly to Denver and opened the Stanley Cup Final 2 nights later. The physical and emotional strain of the previous 3 rounds had accumulated, while Colorado appeared deeper and more capable of controlling the pace. The Panthers remained close in Game 1 before Colorado pulled away for a 3-1 victory. Game 2 was far more difficult. The Avalanche scored early and defeated Florida 8-1. It was the first time during the playoffs that the Panthers looked completely overwhelmed. The defensive structure that had frustrated Boston, Philadelphia, and Pittsburgh could not slow Colorado, while Waugh gave Florida almost nothing at the other end. The series moved to Miami for Game 3. Florida played much better than it had in Denver and kept the score close, but it could not find the tying goal and lost 3-2. Colorado now held a 3-0 lead. No team had recovered from that deficit to win the Stanley Cup, and the Panthers understood that their run was almost over. Game 4 became the final and perhaps most fitting performance of Florida's season. Vanbiesbrouck responded by delivering one of the greatest nights of his career. Colorado attacked repeatedly, but he stopped every shot. Waugh was equally brilliant at the opposite end. Florida put 63 shots on the Avalanche goaltender, and none entered the net. The Panthers had spent the entire postseason surviving close games. Now, with their season on the line, they were locked in the closest game possible. Regulation ended without a goal. The first overtime passed, and the score remained 0-0. The second overtime ended the same way. Players on both teams were exhausted. Shifts became shorter, legs became heavier, and every shot carried the possibility of ending the season. Vanbiesbrouck continued making saves. Waugh continued answering him. Florida's supporters remained in the building, waiting for one final reason to send the Rats onto the ice. Early in the third overtime, Colorado gained possession in Florida's zone. The puck moved back toward the blue line, where Uwe Krupp released a long shot through traffic. Vanbiesbrouck could not see it clearly. The puck traveled through the bodies in front of him and entered the net. After more than 100 minutes of scoreless hockey, the Stanley Cup Final was over. Colorado's players rushed from the bench to celebrate their championship. Florida's players remained on the ice for a moment, exhausted and disappointed, before entering the handshake line. The ending felt abrupt. The Panthers had spent weeks escaping difficult situations, but there was no escape from Colorado. They had been swept in 4 games and finished without a victory in the final. Yet the sweep did not erase what had come before it. Florida had defeated Bourque and the Bruins, Lindros and the Flyers, and Lemieux and the Penguins. Vanbiesbrouck had carried the team through long stretches, but the Panthers had also received essential contributions throughout the roster. Lindsay's goal against Boston, the defense against Philadelphia, and Fitzgerald's shot in Pittsburgh had all been necessary. The Panthers had also given a new hockey market its first shared history. Before the season, South Florida's relationship with the NHL was still uncertain. By the end of the playoffs, the region had its own players, traditions, and stories. The Plastic Rats were unusual and eventually restricted by the league, but they represented a connection between the team and its supporters. The celebration had emerged from the Panthers' own dressing room and grown alongside their unexpected success. Florida returned to the playoffs the following season but lost in the first round. The roster gradually changed, and the organization entered long periods of inconsistency. For more than a quarter of a century, the 1996 run remained the standard against which every Panthers team was measured. The franchise eventually moved from Miami Arena to a larger building in Sunrise, but the Year of the Rat remained its foundational story. Much later, Florida returned to the Stanley Cup Final in 2023, won the first championship in franchise history in 2024, and won again in 2025. Those teams accomplished something the 1996 Panthers never could, but the connection to the original run remained visible. Rats still appeared in the stands and on the ice. The tradition had survived changing rosters, changing arenas, difficult seasons, and nearly 3 decades of waiting. That is what makes the 1996 Panthers worth remembering. Their story was not ultimately about winning the Stanley Cup. It was about creating an identity. Florida began the season as a young franchise trying to establish itself in a market many people doubted. It ended as one of the most recognizable teams in hockey. The Panthers showed that overlooked players could compete with established stars, that a new hockey city could create an atmosphere of its own, and that an unexpected run could shape a franchise long after the final game. The Plastic Rats became the symbol, but they were never the reason Florida won. The Panthers won because Vanbiesbrouck gave them confidence in goal, because McLean convinced them they could do more than remain competitive, and because players throughout the lineup accepted difficult roles. They won because Lindsay challenged Bourque, because Jovanovski stood against opponents with far more experience, because Fitzgerald took a shot when very little seemed available, and because the entire team remained comfortable in games where one moment could decide everything. The run ended 4 victories short of the Stanley Cup, but it gave the Panthers something they had not possessed when the season began: a past. From that point forward, Florida hockey had a story supporters could pass down. It had heroes, defining goals, an old arena filled with noise, and thousands of plastic rats falling onto the ice. Later Panthers teams would reach greater heights. but the first group to make South Florida believe was the team from 1995-96. Thank you for spending this time with me on Chill Sports History. I hope you enjoyed looking back at the Florida Panthers, the year of the Rat, and one of the most unexpected Stanley Cup Final runs in NHL history. There is something special about a team discovering what it can become, at the same time its city is discovering how much it cares. For a few months in South Florida, an ordinary plastic toy became a symbol of hope. Every close game felt survivable, and a collection of players who rarely received the spotlight found themselves standing 4 victories away from the Stanley Cup. The ending was not the one the Panthers wanted, but the journey gave the franchise its first true identity and created memories that remained meaningful even after championship teams finally arrived. Until next time, take care, and thanks for listening. We love sharing these fun stories with you every week. If you'd like to come back for another story, we'd be very happy to have you here, and we can't wait to share more with you.